Well, newly released underwater video shows the final resting place of the long-lost.
Bismarck is a quantum leap for the Germans, and no question. Bismarck is as capable as anything that the...
A thin cloud of rust silt drifted upward as the remotely operated vehicle eased through the shattered windows of the Bismarck's bridge. The cameras struggled for a moment to adjust to the strange, swirling haze, but then the view steadied and the inside of the long, silent command center appeared. The outlines of consoles, collapsed bulkheads, and tangled electrical lines emerged from the darkness like ghosts. For decades, researchers had hoped to map this interior fully, but the bridge had been notoriously difficult to access due to the wreck's depth, instability, and the dense debris field around it. When the ROV finally hovered into the chamber this time, the team expected little more than the usual corroded instruments and sediment-buried plating. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. They did not expect to find something that defied all reasonable explanation. Near the rear bulkhead, half sunken into the tilted floor, stood an object that clearly did not belong to a decaying battleship. Its surfaces, still gleaming faintly despite decades under crushing pressure, reflected the ROV's lights. It formed a shape too precise, too symmetrical, too unmarred to be a relic of 1941. Camera feeds crackled with static as the ROV approached, as if the object resisted scrutiny. It looked as if it had been placed there recently, yet no submersible had touched this compartment since the discovery of the wreck. The Anomaly rested silently among the scattered remains of the bridge equipment, an enigma waiting to be deciphered. At first, the research team thought it might be a trick of lighting or a misinterpreted structure buried under rust. But as the mechanical arms cleared away silt, the truth sharpened into view. The object resembled a sphere, smooth, matte, seamless, and metallic, with faint geometric patterns sketched across its surface. These markings were not familiar engineering stamps or instrument labels. They curved in lines that repeated with impossible uniformity, suggesting craftsmanship far beyond the machine tooling of the early 20th century. Even stranger, the patterns seemed carved with microscopic precision. No corrosion clung to the engraved channels, no barnacles covered its surface. It appeared entirely untouched by time. The team controlling the ROV froze. Data analysts rushed to reinterpret the feeds, zooming in and recalibrating sensors. The object emitted no radiation, no thermal fluctuations, no magnetic disturbance beyond a subtle flicker that registered on the ROV's instruments. It was inert, self-contained, and inexplicably intact. The ROV executed a slow orbit around the sphere, revealing that it was partially embedded in the flooring, except the metal beneath it had not buckled or shattered as one might expect. Instead, the plating looked as though it had melted around the sphere itself, as if the object had entered the structure by softening the steel, then become fixed as the metal resolidified. This discovery immediately raised the first impossible question. How could a device capable of such effects appear inside a wreck discovered inert in 1989, lying undisturbed under nearly 5,000 meters of water? The collapse pattern of the Bismarck had been studied extensively. The ship had broken in half as it sank, its hull crushed inward, its compartments distorted under intense pressure. Countless experts had mapped every known breach and structural failure. No report had ever hinted at anything resembling the anomaly now revealed. The bridge, particularly, had remained a twisted, inaccessible cavity. There had been no sign that something had forced its way into the chamber after the sinking. No recent expedition had the technology or the reason to implant such an object. The sphere seemed almost staged, as though awaiting discovery. Throughout the live feed, the anomaly produced occasional distortions in the camera's signal. Subtle ripples warped the image whenever the ROV passed directly in front of it. These distortions were not consistent with electromagnetic interference or mechanical faults. Technicians checked the ROV system repeatedly. Everything powered normally. The interference appeared only when the sphere was centered in frame, and even then, the distortion fluttered like a reaction to the observation itself. It was as if the object sensed the attention. Inside the control room on the surface vessel, silence pressed heavily among the researchers. The Bismarck had long fascinated historians, engineers, naval analysts, and enthusiasts. Yet nothing in the ship's legacy hinted at the kind of anomaly now resting within its bridge. The sphere did not match any known wartime technology. It did not resemble a mine, a buoy, or an experimental device from naval research programs. Its geometry was too clean, its design too refined, and its condition too pristine. It was out of place in every conceivable way. As the ROV extended a manipulator to make physical contact, the team braced for the unknown. The arm nudged the sphere lightly, and a faint vibration ran through the metal claw. The object did not move. Instead, the vibration seemed to pulse outward, like a brief echo, and then dissipate. A faint luminescence flickered along the etched patterns, visible only for a fraction of a second. The ROV's sensors spiked momentarily, then steadied again. There was no sound, no heat, no energy output detectable afterward. But the flicker suggested that the sphere had responded. The sphere's reaction amplified the puzzle. Modern science could explain alloys resistant to corrosion or systems capable of energy absorption, but not something that remained unchanged after years at abyssal depth. Pressure at this location crushed even specialized equipment. Temperature sat near freezing. The lack of oxygen usually preserved only stone and the most durable metals, and even they would show pitting after so long beneath the sea. Yet the anomaly appeared almost new. Speculation began immediately among the researchers. Some suggested it could be a classified Cold War device accidentally lost and somehow embedded in the shipwreck by improbable chance. But the Cold War ended decades ago, and no known material from that era matched the sphere. Others proposed that perhaps it was a piece of future technology inadvertently dropped by a modern submersible. But modern technology, even the most cutting edge, did not create self-healing structures or leave geometric inscriptions so precise they looked almost biological. Still others postulated that the object could be geological, an unusual metal nodule formed by mineral accretion around a perfect core. But the patterns were too deliberate, and geological nodules did not melt steel floors cleanly into place. Beyond that, the sphere had no irregularities whatsoever. Natural formations always carried imperfections, pits, growth lines. Not this. This sphere seemed purpose-built. The ROV attempted another scan, sending out a low-frequency sonar ping. Instead of returning a standard echo, giving data about density and thickness, the sphere absorbed most of the signal, returning only a hollow, muted response. This suggested the object was either composed of a material unfamiliar to human science or was hollow in an engineered way that resisted probing. A second scan with higher frequency produced a different anomaly. The sphere seemed to return contradictory readings, as though its internal structure shifted subtly between pulses. Upon replay, technicians noticed something even more perplexing. One of the console frames near the sphere, once part of the Bismarck's navigational equipment, had faint traces of the same patterning etched into its surface. The markings were not originally part of the ship's manufacturing. Historical photos confirmed the console had been smooth, unadorned metal. Yet now, under the ROV's lights, delicate lines rippled faintly across the plating, matching the sphere's geometric design. It looked as though the object had imprinted a portion of its pattern onto the ship itself. This raised the possibility that the sphere had been active at some point, perhaps briefly, perhaps unintentionally, affecting the surrounding environment. The imprinting was subtle, almost superficial, but undeniable. The idea that an unknown object could interact with decades-old steel at such depth unsettled everyone watching. Attempts to shift the rubble for a clearer view of the floor beneath the anomaly revealed that the melting effect was not isolated. A circular region, about half a meter wider than the sphere, showed signs of metallurgical transformation. Under the intense lighting, the plating had a glassy sheen, as though it had liquefied and resolidified. This process would require heat levels unimaginable in deep-sea conditions. Nothing on the Bismarck could have generated such temperatures, especially not after the ship settled on the seabed. This phenomenon suggested the sphere had either arrived hot, far hotter than anything that could survive the descent, or had produced the heat itself at some stage. One researcher raised a chilling question. If the sphere had generated such heat, why had the surrounding wiring and interior fittings not burned or warped? Why was only the floor affected? It implied control, directed energy rather than uncontrolled emission. The ROV's camera switched to infrared. The object displayed no warmth at all. It sat in the cold, dark water like a perfectly inert artifact, harmless on the surface, impenetrable beneath. The imprinted patterns, the altered plating, and the camera distortions offered the only signs that it was more than a sphere of unknown alloy. As the ROV backed away to survey the rest of the bridge, the crew realized something else. The sphere sat exactly at the crossroads of structural load paths inside the chamber. In other words, when the ship broke apart during its sinking, massive forces would have surged through that point. Any loose object in the room should have been hurled violently as the hull twisted, but the sphere had come to rest in a position too precise, positioned as though intentionally placed. It had not rolled, it had not shifted. It seemed anchored, either physically or by some mechanism, unobservable. More unsettling was the realization that the sphere's placement provided a nearly central vantage point over the bridge. If one were to stand or float where it rested, the entire command area would stretch outward in all directions, a symbolic placement, almost like an observer's seat. When the ROV increased its distance to capture a wide shot, the sphere seemed to blend into the shadows despite its reflective surface. A trick of the lighting, perhaps, or something more unusual. The sphere appeared to dim the surrounding illumination subtly, reducing contrast in a way that made its edges harder to distinguish. It was not bending light, but rather diminishing it, as though swallowing a fraction of the brightness. The team recorded the effect and re-evaluated the footage repeatedly, confirming it was not a flaw in the ROV. At this point, everything about the anomaly pointed to a technology or construct far beyond what the Bismarck's crew, or any known institution of the early or mid-20th century, could have encountered. The implications unsettled the researchers. If the object had been there since the wreck settled on the seafloor, its resistance to pressure and corrosion meant its creators understood materials far superior to modern alloys. If it arrived later, that meant it had entered one of the least accessible locations on Earth without disturbing the wreck externally. And yet, the eerie feeling persisted that the sphere was not merely placed, but had emerged. One geophysicist reviewing the hull structure suggested that the altered plating beneath the sphere bore a resemblance, not perfect but suggestive, to metallurgical effects caused by rapid displacement events. The idea proposed, tentatively, was that the sphere might have phased into the location rather than moved through the corridors of the wreck. While entirely outside accepted physics, the melting pattern and lack of mechanical damage supported the notion that the sphere did not enter by physical force. The hypothesis was borderline speculative, bordering on the fantastic, but the data left no conventional explanation intact. The implications became broader the longer the team examined the anomaly. Humanity had always been fascinated by deep-sea mysteries, lost vessels, unusual formations, unexplained phenomena seen only by the few who dared reach abyssal depths. But this discovery connected an iconic moment in human history, the sinking of one of the most powerful battleships ever constructed, with a puzzle that suggested contact with something completely unknown. If the sphere had been present when the Bismarck sank, why had no survivor ever reported seeing it? The ship's bridge officers included seasoned sailors who would have noticed any strange equipment or unusual object. Their accounts made no mention of anything resembling the anomaly. The bridge was damaged during the battle, but nothing in those chaotic moments could account for the presence of a smooth metallic orb that altered steel. Another angle emerged as researchers considered historical context. The early 1940s saw numerous reports of unexplained aerial phenomena, stories consistently dismissed or minimized. But the possibility arose that the anomaly might relate to those accounts. The idea seemed speculative, but the timing was curious. Could something have been observing major wartime engagements? Could it have been present at the Bismarck's final battle? And if so, why? The bridge of a battleship was the nerve center of command, an environment rich with information about conflict, strategy, and human behavior. An object studying such data might logically position itself there. Too many coincidences began stacking themselves. threading between history, physics, and speculation. Yet, for all its strangeness, the sphere remained silent. No activity, no expanding patterns, no more flicker of light. It simply existed in defiance of time, reason, and the shipwreck that housed it. The research team debated whether to attempt retrieval. Lifting the object from the wreck would require extraordinary care, especially given the depth and the unknown properties of the anomaly. One miscalculation could risk damaging the wreck, or worse, triggering a reaction from the sphere. If the object's placement was deliberate, whatever deliberate might mean in this context, removing it might alter something the team did not understand. But leaving it where it rested meant accepting that a profound mystery now lay within one of the most historically significant wrecks on Earth. The implications stretched further into scientific realms. If the sphere contained materials never identified, analyzing even a fragment could lead to breakthroughs in metallurgy, pressure-resistant construction, or energy manipulation. If the patterns encoded information, interpreting them could reveal knowledge about a technology or intelligence beyond human experience. If the sphere had the capability to modify matter, understanding that mechanism could transform entire fields of science. And yet, each potential breakthrough came with uncomfortable questions. The presence of such an object in the Bismarck, isolated, hidden from the world, untouched by time, suggested that the anomaly might not be passive. It might be observing. It might be storing information. It might be waiting for something. As the ROV continued recording, the researchers noticed a final detail they had overlooked. Along the back wall of the bridge, partly covered by debris and algae, another faint pattern shimmered into view under angled light. It matched the sphere's geometry. A second imprint, larger this time, not engraved but somehow infused into the metal. The idea arose that the sphere had not merely been placed there, it had interacted with the room. It had marked it, perhaps scanned it, perhaps mapped it. The geometry blended into the bridge structure in a subtle, almost organic way. It did not corrode or erode, as though it were not merely inscribed but bonded with the steel. Whatever the imprint represented, coordinates, diagrams, or something more abstract, it deepened the mystery surrounding the anomaly. The object had done something inside the Bismarck long before it was found, and the traces left behind were only now becoming visible. The discovery in the bridge challenged assumptions about the wreck, about history, about what the ocean hid in its abyssal trenches. The anomaly remained still and silent, but its presence forced a reconsideration of everything known about the Bismarck, and perhaps much more than that. The ocean floor had always been a realm of secrets, but this was something different. This was a mystery that linked past and present, technology and myth, science and possibility. The sphere inside the bridge did not belong to the era of battleships. It did not belong to the human story as currently understood, and its existence raised the profound question of how much of that story, how much of history itself, might be missing something crucial, something waiting to be uncovered only in the deepest, darkest places on Earth. It rested there still, in the silent heart of the long-dead Titan, its surface unblemished, its purpose unreadable, and its implications vast enough to reshape the understanding of a world that had never expected to find anything like it in the ruins of a warship that had fallen more than 8 decades before. The bridge of the Bismarck had become more than a historical site. It was now the location of an enigma that challenged everything known about human capability, technological development, and the strange, hidden intersections between the past and something that felt far older, far more advanced, and far more mysterious. The discovery did not answer questions. It created them. And each new detail added depth to the mystery, hinting that this anomaly was not merely a misplaced artifact, but a doorway, metaphorical or literal, into a realm of understanding that had yet to be reached. The researchers could only watch through the ROV's cameras as the sphere remained in its impossible position, silent and unmoving, yet undeniably present. In the stillness of the deep, surrounded by the remnants of one of history's most formidable warships, it radiated a presence both enigmatic and unmistakable, as though guarding a story no one yet knew how to read. The ROV's lights shifted as it adjusted position, and a new angle revealed yet another subtle irregularity in the chamber. On a panel that had collapsed decades earlier, a faint ripple in the metal curved outward in a perfect arc, an arc that pointed directly toward the sphere. This formation was unlike the simple dents caused by impact or collapse. It curved too evenly, as if drawn by an invisible compass. Metallurgists observing the stream noted that the ripple pattern bore characteristics of material displacement rather than deformation. It looked as though the steel had briefly behaved like a fluid, reshaping itself along an invisible field. What made this detail especially intriguing was its partial completion. The curvature seemed to start abruptly, then fade midway across the panel. It gave the impression of being interrupted, as though whatever phenomenon caused it had ceased suddenly. This incompleteness suggested a moment frozen in time, an event that had begun to affect the surroundings but had been halted before fully manifesting. The new arc deepened, emerging theories that the sphere possessed capabilities beyond passive presence. Its interaction with the metal implied directed influence, perhaps triggered unintentionally or in response to unknown conditions within the bridge. Each discovery hinted that the anomaly had not merely arrived, but had acted, however briefly, upon its environment. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on this anomaly and what do you expect will happen? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.